Heyo people, welcome to a new YouTube video of mine about the deck I played at the WCQ in Essen, but mostly about Kojo. Essen was really great, and it was fun to finally play this game in person, meet a ton of people from the community. A special shout out to Stefano for keeping me entertained between rounds, and of course to Runefolk and Pandy for streaming the entire event. The tournament was hosted by the White Rabbit Community Game Store, and they did a fantastic job. The vibes were great, the players were nice, and the staff was kind. And with that, this is the list I was running. Now, I'm not going to go over every single decision point I was making in deck building, but simply over the things that are maybe a little bit less standard as far as Kojo lists on 39 cards, for example, are concerned. On that front, I think I want to start with the big decision point for me, which was the fact that with Afanas still being the menace that it was, running an anti-Afanas list was very tempting. The big tech card for that matchup is the rare Duel of Grit. I decided to only run one, and this is my biggest regret for the tourney. Since I know it's good in the matchup, I need to be able to beat Afanas to give myself a chance to win the event. And yet, because the mana option is better into the general metagame as a catch-all answer, and my online testing had been largely into a variety of decks, I decided to instead go with a 2-1 split of the Duel of Grit common and rare, while running the full free mana option. I think retroactively I would have instead run 2 mana option rares and free Duel of Grit rares. The mess is another controversial one, but similarly, this is a card that is particularly good into Afanas in my opinion. Though I do think free mess is too many, as it is often such a horrendous resupply if you already have a mess in play. Still, if you can get it on turn 1 alongside another 1-cost card, it just feels amazing. You're never going to run out of gas. Because of that, I was on 2 of the mess. The Snowman was the final 2 rare slots for me. I was trying a couple different things in this slot, from more Orda Spies to the Duel of Grits. As already mentioned, I would have liked to cut one of these for another Duel of Grit rare. Still, Snowman is a great turn 1 play, and also later in the game is overstated for its cost, and just solid overall. The last card I will talk about is the common Isumbeshi. I've always been a fan of it, and specifically in Trial by Frost when I was running a very Simon-inspired Kojo build, I learned to really appreciate the power of this card and the value of its double 1 cost. In my opinion, in a mess build, the power and flexibility of this card increases even more, and is just phenomenal in so many regards. Specifically as well, you're running so many landmarks on turn 1, you can often go 2-cost landmark and still trade 1 for 1, again, especially into decks like Afanas. Now, I will mention running this many 1-cost cards means that you need to be a little careful while playing this deck with your pacing, as if you mana card advantage a little too aggressively, or in general play too forward, you will lose games from drawing 2 1-cost cards in a pivotal turn. Big shout out and thank you to Rinku for lending me 2 of their uniques here in this free cost 2 fairy and the Orda Spy. I appreciate it a lot. Awesome. I'm going to talk a little more later about some other Kojo variants, but for now, the tourney report. Overall, I went 5-3 during the event, playing against a good variety of decks. I started my day with 3 straight wins against a Kojo, a Basira, and a Teja. I was quite confident in all 3 matches, but they were not super easy. For example, against the Teja, I had to mana option on day 2 with no ramp to get rid of an Aloe Vera, which makes for a very uncomfortable game. Still, we got there. It was at game 4 when my opponent was Sigismar and played out a unique that I had recognized because I had just played against it the other day on BGA, that I realized I was against a very strong player. I think they were top 100, maybe even top 50 when I played against them online. Indeed, I had made an early misplay in the game as well, and it was punished over the course of the game and resulted in me collecting my first loss. I rebounded in a match against another Swiss player, which was super fun. Got to play a game in Swiss German. They were on Basira again. to then get all my dreams crushed 2 games in a row by the Altered Aces Fanas train, that being of course Matmatu and Tempête de la Neige, and finally picking up a win against Traced in the final round. Looking at the results of this tourney does feel like losing specifically to the top of the meta. I realized that it's not only that, inevitably, to win I would need to be able to beat the Ephanis and Siggy decks, where the rare Duel of Grit would have helped a lot, but also that these decks are piloted by the very best players, making it all the more important to have a fully teched deck in those matches. At least knowing that all my losses were against very, very strong players was a little bit comforting on some level, I suppose. But so this video hopefully can also help you a little for the near future of Altered, where we are likely to see a significant decline in the Fanos decks. I'm going to cover what I believe are the 3 main ways of playing Kojo going forwards. The 3 categories of top tier Kojo decks that I perceive at the moment are what I will describe as the Hunger builds, the Mess builds, and the Classic builds. All 3 options have some unique strengths and weaknesses that make them all viable. Also, because the core characters that tie the archetypes together are fairly similar, there is some mixing and mashing you can do between these. So there aren't really hard limits to where one archetype stops and another begins. That being said, let's start with the classic Kojo build. The deck we are looking at here is by Psycho, a perennial mess hater. This build has a very straightforward game plan of playing dudes with good stats and solid interaction, as well as being a little more heavy on the free cost slot than some other Kojo builds might be, as there's less in the high end or in the card advantage departments for this build, so pacing becomes even more important. I would really like to highlight the one of Aklut Psycho is running, as I believe it may be a big player moving forward, even in Kojo, given how difficult the Trace matchup can so often be. Overall, the idea is to be running very few situational cards so that no matter the spot you are in, you will have a gas in the tank and stats in play, so there are not a whole lot of standout cards as a consequence. This version of Kojo will, for the foreseeable future at least, always do well into any metagame, as it is built to be as solid and consistent as possible. Next up, we are looking at Hunger Kojo, and for this one we are of course going to take a peek at a Leif Fey list. Obviously the star card here is the Hunger, which will be a game ender in a variety of different matchups from Golrang to Sierra, but also do well in many others. This build isn't running any landmarks, as Hunger is no fan of them, and instead focuses slightly more on in-hand card advantage. I think there are a couple of approaches you can have with Hunger builds, from playing very interactive early and attack the opponent's resources, to playing more for an expedition lead and instead use the Hunger as a 1-for-1 expedition machine. I would love to highlight the Twinkle Twinkle. It is not a must-run card in this build, but besides being a card that plays very well in Kojo already, due to the number of cheesy double advances it can get you, it plays even better with the Hunger, as it can often force your opponents to play from hand into it, while also discarding all things you've put to sleep from the turn before. I think it's also worth talking about the 2 fairy rare. 2-cost Sabotage would play phenomenally in all Kojo lists. However, its subpar from reserve cost and stats make it very hard to fit into conventional Kojos. As this is neither a Haven or Mess build, this is far less costly in the Hunger Kojo, and becomes a very interesting consideration for some cheap interaction. I could see Hunger Kojo be particularly strong in a meta where Teja makes a bit of a comeback, and maybe some of the other heroes that operate more around expensive landmarks and catch-up mechanisms gain in competitive grounds as well. Finally, we are on to the final type of Kojo build, which is of course the Mess Kojo. For this one, I am stealing one of Rinku's tournament winning lists, not the one from Dallas, but actually an Ace top 1 result. The first generally notable thing about this build relative to the others is that it has a significantly lower curve, running Isumbeshi and less free cost cards. This is because if things go to plan and you get to stick that mess in play, you will have the extra resources to play this low curve. Notably, often mess builds will also be on the Haven, as the two cards synergize quite nicely. Other than that, I think the Orda Spy is a notable mention. If you're running a card like Mess, it is nice to streamline your from reserve costs as much as you possibly can. Hence, the 2-cost free from reserve plays particularly well in this build. On a similar note, Isumbeshi provides a ton of flexibility and potential power if you have the card advantage to leverage it, and also functions nicely because of that in this build. Beyond that, this deck is very streamlined and efficient. The worries on this front is that the mess is quite bad into the Grems, which is looking like it may be a big player for Traced in the new meta. If you don't get a mess out, sometimes you can lose games to drawing too many cheap cards in the mid to late game. Still, I have seen even some free mess, free haven builds do very well on the ladder, and it's looking like these builds are still completely fine to play. To end off this video, I'll talk a little bit about tech cards that may be interesting into the new meta. If the curve goes significantly up, I do think the Hunger may just be the way to go. Otherwise, if Trace becomes the dominant force as a Siggy Kojo counter deck, then it may be worth looking at cards like a Clute as ways to hinder them from achieving their game plan. I'll also point out Physical Training and Red as good ways to maintain pressure and card advantage in a way that plays around Hooked and the lacking sabotage and removal effects in many Traced lists. I do believe as well that as Duel of Grit Rare was an Ephanos counter and actually doesn't play as efficiently into many other decks, it may be an easy card to cut at the moment. Finally, is warning not to forget to pay your mana eruption tax, as into a broader metagame, a catch-all removal is a great idea, especially if you're worried about a deck like Etsadi or Sierra. With that, I do hope you learned something about this hero, and hope you have much success in your altered games. Farewell everybody, and see you in the next one.